Welcome everybody, we're glad you're here. It's nice to have you here. So this event is part of it's actually, we're wrapping up our Salina Reads season. And this year we read 2 books in conjunction with each other, Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers and How to Be a Family by Dan Coyce, who is here this evening. And the goal of Salina Reads was to strengthen community connections, provide deeper understanding, and to do all that through an avenue of literature, and in conjunction with the literature, having discussion and shared experiences around the themes from both of these books. So we're happy to welcome Dan. His book, How to Be a Family, The Year I Dragged My Kids Around the World to Find a New Way to Be Together, was a Kansas Notable book in 2020. We really felt like, in addition to this exploring themes of family, it tied in very well with our concept of exploring themes related to community, because they did, as they traveled to these 4 different places, experience how the communities operated. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Dan is from Arlington, Virginia. He's a writer and editor. He writes for Slate, and he has also written 3 other books besides How to Be a Family. Dan, can you just tell us a little bit about each of these titles, since we're...
Sure. I'd love to see them so big and beautiful up on the screen. The one on the right is the most recent book. There are copies of it here at the library. It's my first novel. It's called Vintage Contemporaries. It's set in New York City in the 1990s and early 2000s, and follows 2 young women as they arrive in their 20s and then grow into their 30s. They're very close friends, and then they're not friends anymore because they have a breakup, and then they're friends again. And that's what that's about. The middle book is called The World Only Spins Forward. I co-wrote it with a cultural historian named Isaac Butler. It's a history of Tony Kushner's Pulitzer Prize-winning play Angels in America, which was later filmed by Mike Nichols for HBO with Meryl Streep and a bunch of other, and Al Pacino and a bunch of other great actors. It's an oral history that we interviewed about 200 different people who were associated with the creation of the play, the initial productions of it, and then later productions as well as the HBO miniseries. And then spun their stories together to tell the story of what we think is the most important American play of the 20th century.
And that was about the AIDS epidemic, is that correct?
About the AIDS epidemic, set in the late 80s, early 90s in New York City and San Francisco. And on the left is a book I wrote for a wonderful series called 33 1/3. Many of you may, of course, know 33 1/3 as the speed the record plays at. My children don't understand that reference at all. Thankfully, all of us in this room do. But the series is a series of short books, each exploring a single album by an artist. So it's a book of music history and criticism and a kind of music biography. And this one is of a Hawaiian musician named Israel Kamakawiwa Ole, who if you know him because of his ukulele cover of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and What a Wonderful World that you have heard played at a number of rehearsal dinners. He had a fascinating life and career. He's a native Hawaiian. He died very young of health conditions related to his weight. But in the short time that he lived, he became a kind of Hawaiian hero, and then after he died, his song became the most famous and prominent Hawaiian music song among non-Hawaiian listeners in the history of Hawaiian music. So I wrote that in 2011.
Okay, great. And then, of course, the reason we're here this evening is to delve in a little bit deeper to How to Be a Family. And Dan has done us the honor of putting together a few pictures and things, and is going to start out with a short presentation about his time and the book, and also read to us a little bit from the book.
Hey everyone, it's detecting the device, but in a moment you will see my family as of December 2016. In fact, it's the last night that we were in our house in Arlington, Virginia, right before we left for a trip around the world, the trip that would end up creating that book, How to Be a Family. That's me up top, that's my wife Alia on the right, Lyra on the left, and Harper peeking in at the bottom. At the time we left, Lyra was 11 and Harper was 9. This was right at the end of 2016, they're older now. We took this trip because we felt like we were going a little bit insane raising kids this age in the specific environment we were raising them in a suburb of Washington, D.C., both of us working extremely driven, demanding jobs, both of us scheduling our kids out the wazoo so that they had something to do while we were working, and then all of us ending up maybe managing to eat dinner together and like talking for 3 minutes before everyone went to bed and failed to sleep because we all had too many things we were thinking about all at once. It felt really like we weren't communicating and that our lives didn't have anything to do with each other, that we were sort of living our own little train track lives rolling down the track, and there were people next to us but we didn't get a chance to see them or really know who they were. And we wanted to figure out if that was just because we sucked, or if there was something about the kind of life we were trying to live that was causing or contributing to some of these problems. We wanted to see how family life was different in other places, and we wanted to know why it was different in other places. What were the cultural and social and structural things that different communities did to help families live different kinds of lives than the ones that we were living. So we decided over the course of 2017, we would rent out our house and travel around the world and live in 4 different places over the course of that year. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those places, what we saw there, and how our family changed along the way. So our first stop was New Zealand, the North Island of New Zealand in Wellington. In New Zealand, we were really struck initially and immediately by how much independence kids had in that environment, which was very different from in Arlington. In Arlington, we live on a very busy street. We're surrounded by a lot of very busy streets. It's not particularly pedestrian friendly. Kids don't really even ride their bikes around that much. And kids mostly, when they get together, do it in the form of organized play dates when they're young, or maybe they manage to get together when they are old enough to have a phone and text each other. But a lot of their interaction happens online, a lot of it happens over text, or in Discord rooms, or in other apps that I don't truly understand and fear. But we didn't see the kind of, at home, the kind of free-form, just sort of roaming the neighborhood that I really associated with my childhood. I grew up in Wisconsin, outside of Milwaukee, and that I think a lot of people in my generation, and our generation, do associate with childhood. But in New Zealand, we were really struck by how much independence for kids was baked into the whole system there. Like, for example, when Harper's school took her and everyone in her class snorkeling in wetsuits in the bay one morning, just as part of their marine biology unit. And in fact, they never even sent home a permission slip of any kind. We had no idea this was happening. I just happened to like walk by the bay and see my child in a wetsuit about to go snorkel, like, you know, swimming above eagle rays and stuff, who she was very happy to tell me if they stung her even once, she would die instantly. But even beyond that, just our Wellington, our neighborhood in Wellington was totally remarkable for how much children were encouraged to just disappear and roam on their own in ways that I recognized from my childhood that seemed very surprising to my children. New Zealanders also have a very close relationship to the natural world that comes in part from living in such a beautiful part of the natural world. New Zealand seems designed by in a lab or by God to just constantly force you to go, oh my, that's incredible, everywhere you look. New Zealanders, part of being a New Zealand family is getting out and experiencing that. We were not a particularly outdoorsy family. I believe I would describe us as indoorsy. My daughter Lyra likes to say that we are inside cats, not outside cats. But during our time in New Zealand, we thought we need to learn to be outside cats. We wanted to see if we could become a family that hikes, or as they call it there, tramps, if we could go on tramps. The answer to that is that my kids learned a lot about how when Dad says something like, it's like an hour-long hike, they should not take what I say seriously, or ever trust me. After our 3 months in New Zealand, we moved to the Netherlands for 3 months. We lived in Delft, which is a town about 45 minutes outside of Amsterdam. known for its Delftware pottery, and Baby Technical University, and a bunch of beautiful cathedrals, including one that leans more than the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they'll happily tell you. In the Netherlands, of course, Dutch culture really revolves around cycling. That is the way that Dutch people get around. Dutch people travel way more miles on a bicycle on average in a given year than they do by car. In fact, most people in the Netherlands don't even have cars. It's certainly in the city center where we live, no one had cars. So we didn't have cars, we rode bikes. And it was a real challenge for us to learn to ride like Dutchmen, which means riding everywhere and doing it fearlessly, doing it no matter what the weather, and doing it not wearing a helmet. That's very important. Dutch people were very quick to tell us that if we wore helmets, everyone would know immediately that we were Americans and we would be belittled. So we did it, and what is remarkable is how the infrastructure of every town, city, village, and area of countryside in the Netherlands is built to make riding unbelievably safe, comfortable, and easy. It helps that the country is as flat as Kansas. But it also helps that everyone who's driving a car in the Netherlands is also a cyclist. So they are always on the lookout for cyclists, and they show a lot more respect to cyclists on the road than the drivers in Arlington, Virginia do, who frequently just would like you to get out of their way and will do anything necessary to make that happen. We all really came to love this part of Dutch culture, and it changed the way we viewed our environment. It allowed our kids to get around more easily and to explore. It allowed us to explore places we might otherwise never have seen. It also allowed us to do things like make our kids ride to school even in the pouring rain, because what are we going to do? We don't have a car. We can't drive you to school. And they would be like, well, can you ride with us? And we'd say, no. It's raining. Why would we do that? It's raining. We have to work, kids. Dutch families make decisions in a very particular way, and it's a culturally specific model that is used in Dutch businesses, in Dutch governance and in government, and in Dutch family life, and it's called the polder model. It revolves around and requires negotiation and agreement between all parties in any major decision that's happening. So for example, if this library was in the Netherlands and Stephanie wanted to invite an author to come, in order to take that step, she would make sure to get all stakeholders in the library together, have a long discussion about it, allow people to state their opposing views, like, we don't like Dan, and then negotiate finally a way to have everyone agree on the best course of action. And that happens, and that means that even the person at the very top of the company has as much say as a custodian. And it's a remarkable way to run a business. It leads to Dutch businesses being very unlikely to make terrible decisions, but also very unlikely to make exciting decisions. But they tend to run right down the middle and very rarely fail or wildly succeed. In a family, it means that when Dutch families make decisions about what they're going to do, the parents ask the kids what is important to them, take their opinion into account, and try to reach an agreement that everyone in the family can agree with. I found out that I hated that. I hated asking my kids what they wanted to do. I wanted to be a dictator and tell my kids what to do. Like, for example, I wanted to tell them, we're going around the world for a year and you're going to love it. And it turned out that they didn't always love all of it. And in fact, would have loved to have been consulted before we even left on this trip or along the way about some of the things we ought to do. That was really difficult for me. And one of the results was that when Lyra, pictured here, writing alongside me in our favorite cafe, had a major crisis at her Dutch school revolving around how she simply refused to do any of the things that the teachers told her to do. I learned how bad I truly was at listening to my kids in the Dutch way. The end result of that was that when Lyra read the book before it was published, when I had finished the draft, she demanded to have her say in the book too, which is why there's a whole section in the book written by her, which is called What My Dad Got Wrong About Me by Lyra Coyce. I don't know that I have given up all of my tyranny, but certainly our family is much more of a democracy these days in ways that drive me insane. Next, we headed to Costa Rica. In in Central America. We were out of town on the far western coast on the Pacific Ocean called Samara. We wanted to see what it was like living in a tropical paradise. Would that make us extremely chill? Would it allow us to truly relax and live pura vida, as Costa Ricans love to say? Or would we bring all our neuroses, fights, and annoyances along with us and just transplant them into a warmer, more beautiful place? While we were there, our lives really revolved around the ocean in a way that I think my kids and I found really fulfilling. We swam just about every day. Samara had a very interesting and lively expat community, a lot of retirees. There's an enormous American retirement population in Costa Rica because housing is cheap, it's beautiful, and healthcare is American quality, but much cheaper. But there's also a lot of families, and a lot of those families in Samara at that time, we found were searching for some of the same things that we were searching for. And so a lot of our experience there became about talking with them about ways that they had tried to transform their lives in the way that we were attempting to transform ours. One couple was preparing for a trip around the world and then for a move to Canada. Another couple from Arizona had just finished sailing the Caribbean in a tiny little sailboat that they'd spent their life savings on and had spent 6 months in, driving each other crazy. One Seattle family was renovating an old hotel in Samara and hoping to get out of their insane software jobs where they seem to be working 19 hours a day to do something totally different. Costa Rica was sort of full of people seeking escape. What came with Paradise, we all discovered, was a wildlife. Some amazing wildlife, including this iguana who got trapped in our kitchen and then pooped all over the floor in an attempt to get out. We found the experience of living in the tropics an incredible lesson in how you do truly bring everything with you, no matter where you go, but that trying to adjust to a different rhythm of life can have incredible effects on the way that you interact with each other, both positively and negatively. When we moved slower, we had more time to notice what we loved about one another. I think everyone also had more time to notice what annoyed them about me. And finally, we came back to the United States, and we came back to Kansas. After all, just because we lived in one part of America, on the East Coast, in a Washington suburb, did not mean that our family life was the same as all Americans' family lives. We had friends in Hayes. Our friend Catherine, who Ali and I both went to college with, had told us for years and years and years about how, I would complain about how busy we were, about how crazy things were, and she would say, Dan, if you just moved to Hayes, America, you would be so bored that you would be happy. So I called her bluff, and we moved 2 blocks away from her to see what would happen for the 3 months that we lived in Hayes. Hayes was a real lesson in the way that people in small cities, let's say small cities, not small towns, take responsibility to make the kinds of lives that they want to live for themselves. And there's no better example of that, I think, than this show that Catherine, who's a playwright, put on at the Fort Hays State Auditorium, the Beach Schmidt Center. It was sort of a Halloween-themed adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream with orchestral accompaniment, but it came about entirely because she wanted it to come about, because she wanted to write a show for kids and actors in the community to be in. So she wrote the show, and then she got funding from the city, and then she recruited the all-volunteer Hayes Symphony to play for it. She recruited me to be the assistant director because there was no one else around to do that. And all of it happened because people wanted things to happen, because they wanted to make certain kinds of lives for themselves in this place. There were musicians who wanted a symphony to play in, so they made a symphony. There was a writer who wanted a show for her kids to be in, so she wrote the show. There was a community that wanted to have theater for people to see, so they made that theater happen. Harper's favorite part of Kansas was the traditional Kansas farm kid driving lesson, where you take them out on a very straight farm road, put them on your lap, and hit the gas. She was 10 when this picture was taken. It's especially bittersweet for me to remember now because just last month Harper, now 15, got her learner's permit and is driving for real, and for the last 6 years has never missed a chance to remind me that if we still lived in Kansas, she would already be driving. She could drive herself everywhere, and I wouldn't have to drive her anywhere. And this is us now. The kids are 15 and 17. The trip really transformed our lives and changed the way we treated one another. When the pandemic came and we were stuck with each other in a house, we found that we'd sort of already had practice for that doomsday scenario. I'm really grateful that we had this experience and that I got to write about it. And thank you for asking me to come here to talk to you about it. I'm going to read a short bit from the book. And I was inspired by this beautiful library to read a little bit about the Hayes Library. So this section takes place in Hayes. It's the afternoon of Lyra's first day, Lyra and Harper's first day back at school. We had not been in school for many months in Samara. That was our summer vacation. But everyone was really desperate to get back to school. But our house did not have the internet, which drove my children who live on the internet completely insane. That afternoon, Lyra grudgingly agreed to leave the house. She needed the internet. She changed into shorts and a sweatshirt, reflecting the fact that, Kansas style, it was now 30 degrees hotter than it had been when she left for school. We walked down Main Street to the library, which Catherine, our friend who lived there, had advised us was very good. Surprisingly good, she added. The library, a blocky building in the same creamy Kansas limestone as most of the public structures around town, was recently renovated with the help of a public bond to look more like the 1911 Carnegie-funded library the city foolishly tore down in the 1960s. Inside, 5 out of 5 cool librarians complimented Lyra on her anime sweatshirt. Where do these amazing librarians come from? I texted Catherine. They're all English majors, she wrote back. Those girls don't have any place else to work. Upstairs, there was a remarkable young adult section, completely packed with kids doing crafts, reading books, playing computer games, and chasing one another around. The Halloween display featured an enormous hand-drawn Babadook, a monster from a recent horror movie. Babadook book, the display read. Lyra walked over to the YA desk and asked about some bad dystopian series I'd never heard of. The clerk brightened and said, "I love that one," and walked Lyra right over to it. Lyra made a complicated series of gestures that seemed meant to suggest both that she was dying of joy and that she was finally, after 6 months in cities with little to offer the English-speaking reader, getting the chance to live again. Vera Haynes was the YA librarian at the Hayes Library. She came to Hayes to work as a youth minister, only to have the church that had hired her withdraw the job offer just before she started. But then this job came up, she told me. I applied for it, somehow I got it, and I applied to library grad school the next day. She now studies at FHSU, where her fiance is a librarian too. The library is one of the few places in town that's open after school every day. We do have stiff competition, she said, with 4-H and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and church youth groups. Oh my gosh, we can't do anything on Wednesday night because that's youth group night. I thought she was kidding, but then I looked at the library calendar crowded with games, activities, quiz nights, coding clubs, and there was a big empty stripe right down the middle of the calendar like a highway median. Even the schools in town don't schedule concerts or games on Wednesday night. No kids would come. I interviewed Vera Haynes the week of the first Me Too revelations, and she replaced the Babadook Halloween display with one featuring books on sexual harassment and assault. Those books are going fast, she said, but I can't keep them in the building. Haynes seemed unconcerned with whether parents would take offense at the display. She viewed her sole constituency as the teenagers who show up every day, not the parents who work till 5 and then call their kids home. She recently instituted a new rule. Even if your parent telephones the library looking for you, the staff will not confirm you're there. We got a lot of pushback at first, she said, but the ALA upholds that anyone who uses the library should have the expectation of privacy. She nodded, as if to say, and that was it. It is, I realized, a crucial policy, one that establishes the YA section and the library as a whole as a place that teenagers can trust, a safe place that not only will not rat your location out to your parents, but will not also tell your dad, for example, that you checked out a book about being gay. The library would not abandon you in your time of need. Downstairs from the teen section, I saw the larger role the library played in the life of Hayes as an example of what the sociologist Eric Kleinenberg has called social infrastructure. Public spaces that bring together and serve the social needs of broad populations. Older couples learned how to use their phones at Thursday tech support. Recent immigrants printed out employment forms. Mothers on maternity leave met other parents at Wednesday morning baby story time. The Hayes Library serves as a kind of town center for families, teens, the elderly, anyone who needs it. The Hayes Library is a public good, funded by a tax levy the people of Hayes voted upon themselves run by optimistic, ambitious 25-year-olds, open to all, a home to teenagers where their parents cannot hassle them. It is glorious. In our 3 months in Hayes, Lyra and I went there almost every single day.
Well, again, thank you for being here. It's
Thank
been,
you.
Most of the people here I know have read the book because they participated in some discussions with us
Oh, yeah.
recently as part of the Salina Reads.
I'm very happy to be back in Kansas. I had a real deja vu moment as I flew in. The plane from Chicago stops in Hayes and then it comes to Salina, so I spent a glorious 15 minutes in the Hayes airport, just on the tarmac. But I recognized everything as we were flying in. I'm going back tomorrow to see friends.
So it's been a few years. What would you say the lasting impacts are for you and your family from your various experiences?
The way I described it in the book continues to be true, which is that it has become the kind of defining origin story of our family for all four of us. It is now the thing we will forever have in common, the thing that provides continuous, constant reference points for all of us in our dealings with each other. It helps our kids understand us and deal with us because they've seen us in these sort of extreme togetherness situations. And it also helps us understand our kids even as they have grown and transformed and changed over the last 5 years. They really helped us learn how we can function as a unit in the world and how we can send each individual person off to accomplish things but still be able to come back to us no matter what environment or situation we're in. And that's been really valuable. I mean, I mentioned the pandemic before. I really think the pandemic would have been much worse and much different for us had we not had this experience. And I know a lot of families who having that forced togetherness was a real strain and was very difficult. And we felt very lucky that it was less difficult for us because we'd already had the difficult, terrible part several years before.
And so are there specific things about, I mean, you alluded to some of the different parenting practices or even the way communities operate. Are there some that you came away feeling like, oh yeah, we want to try this at home?
We really did become a Holder model family. As much as I joke about wishing I was a dictator, that really transformed the way that we made decisions in our family. You know, and that comes in part with your kids getting older. It becomes a lot harder to force your kids to do things when they're suddenly teenagers and they're too big to pick up. But also when they truly are trying to assert their independence and their role in the family, their importance within the family. Just laying down the law and being like, all right, well, here's where we're going on vacation, or here's what the classes you're gonna take next year, or whatever, that simply doesn't work. And it was so useful to me to have the Holder model as a way to think about making decisions as a family and making sure that everyone feels as though that their needs and their opinions are included in that conversation. We're also now a biking family, despite Harper's love of driving. We bike a lot more than we used to with the help of e-bikes, which help make the hills in Arlington more manageable. But Harper bikes to work when she bikes to work. Lyra bikes to rehearsals. I bike pretty much everywhere I go now, including into DC for work. That's a real transformation. And that comes from understanding how freeing and wonderful that was in the Netherlands. And I wouldn't say we're like campers, but I would say that the outdoors plays a much bigger role in what we think of as what we want out of our family life. And so we are, let's say, enthusiastic walkers through the woods as often as we can.
You chose not to bike while you're in Hayes, Kansas.
I biked only a little bit. Like the house that we stayed in was a house that had been on the market, like many houses in Hayes at that time, for like over a year. And our friend Catherine basically tracked the owners down and convinced them to rent it to us for 3 months so they would have some income coming in. And there were a bunch of bikes in the shed, so I used them now and then. But boy, I discovered that there is nothing like a Kansas headwind when you're trying to get across town to really convince you that it's not worth it.
It seems so logical. It's flag.
Right, and so I was like, it's gonna be exactly like being in the Netherlands, but it turned out it wasn't. I mean, also Hayes has like a bike lane, I believe, or at least when we were there was a single bike lane on one street.
Yeah.
And it was not that hospitable necessarily to cycling, but really mostly it was lane.
Yeah. And is Arlington set up for biking?
Arlington is getting better. It's a very car-driven suburb. But there is a real activist community in Arlington that has worked hard in the last 10 years or so to pressure, to show community support for cycling and to pressure county and city government to install more bike lanes, more protected bike lanes, and more infrastructure. So it is much easier to get around in Arlington now on a bike than it was even 6 years ago or 7 years ago before we left. It still is nerve-wracking. I still wear a helmet. Unlike in the Netherlands, there's for 6 months after we got back, I was like, I'm just gonna ride big, like I did in the Netherlands. I deserve this space on the road. I don't need a helmet. They can look out for me. And then like 3 close calls later, I was like, maybe I'll just wear the helmet.
And no one was going to belittle you.
No one called me a stupid American.
So if you were to be planning a trip like this again, say you were to do it again, are there any different countries you've thought of that you might have liked to visit and see what they're like?
Oh man, when we were planning this trip the first time, we basically spent 6 months where my wife and I, every conversation we had was basically one of us being like, Finland, and the other one going, oh! Yes, we have a million ideas for amazing places we can go, and it was very hard to narrow them down, in part because I knew I was writing this book. The book made the trip possible, and it gave me a job while I was on the trip, like it helped me earn money in order to make it so. But so I wanted the book to reflect places where I felt we really could learn something that was very different from our current family life, that could push us in directions that were uncomfortable for us, but also places where in 3 months we could at least glean a tiny bit about the culture. Like the idea of like going to Japan for 3 months, for example, when we don't speak Japanese, and even daring to think we could understand the tiniest fraction of what was going on there seemed laughable. Nevertheless, boy would I love to know how family life works in Japan. I've watched that show with like 3-year-old kids walking to the market by themselves without their parents to pick up eggs. I would love to do that. I would love to have that experience. I would love to go to a Scandinavian country and experience that kind of, especially winter life in Scandinavian countries, where so much of that life revolves around closeness inside the home and then brief forays out into the world to like get your weekly dose of socialization. I really, really, really wanted to go to West Africa, to Senegal or Nigeria and experience family life there. So yeah, there's a million places. The key is that we would have to talk to our kids about it and find out where they wanted to go, and then take their opinion seriously.
So I think it's interesting that we asked what did you take away from it in terms of, what are the great things you learned, but are there some things you saw and observed either about family life or community life that you think, no, that needs to stay there?
Yeah. The biggest crisis that we had on this trip, one that I alluded to when I was talking, happened in the Netherlands, and it revolved around Lyra and her school. And Harper went to the same school, and she also had some problems in that school. For Lyra, it was a real an overwhelming, I can't go to this school anymore type deal. And that was mostly, it was because of a bunch of mistakes I made in planning, which did not make me feel great. I had searched and searched for, we wanted to just send them to a public school, not to pay a bunch of money to send them to the American school, A, because that did not seem very Dutch, and B, because we didn't have money. But I wanted them to at least go to a school where there was a chance that most of the people would speak some English. Dutch people, like most Europeans, learn English as a matter of course, but it usually starts happening around 7th or 8th grade into high school. So my kids who at that point were elementary, middle school age, if they had gone to in a random Dutch school, it was very possible that none of their classmates would have any English at all. But then I found this amazing seeming school in Delft that was part of a pilot program the Dutch government was running for English language immersion, like a bilingual English-Dutch immersion program. And I thought, well, that's perfect. They'll go, they'll be like, everyone will love them because they'll be like native English speakers and they'll help all the other kids with their English. And then we got there and it turned out that just wasn't true. Something had gone wrong in my conversations with everyone, and it was not a bilingual Dutch English school at all. And what we learned about the Dutch education program was that like a lot of Dutch culture, it's based around very specific ideas of what kind of person will be having the experience. Dutch schools are designed to create Dutch citizens who behave in certain ways, act in certain ways, and understand the rules because they have been living them since birth. And so our kids immediately did really badly in that situation because they were American kids who loved explaining exactly what they thought was stupid about the rules. And also who just didn't understand what was going on in the school and had trouble, fulfilling basic assignments or doing what was expected of them. And the school, which Dutch schooling is incredibly efficient in teaching Dutch kids exactly what they need to thrive in that society. But it's incredibly bad at dealing with anyone who falls outside of the norm. So they're not particularly good with students with learning disabilities or learning differences. They're also not particularly good with gifted students, at least not in a way that I recognize. The Dutch way of dealing with someone who's particularly gifted in math is to take them out of math class to give everyone else time to catch up, and put them in something they're bad at so they can be bad at something for a while. The goal is to get everyone as close to average as possible. But people who naturally have trouble reaching that for whatever reason, perhaps because they're loud and American, really struggle in that environment. And as much as I respected what I saw as the results, which was a society that was devoted to equity and to smoothing out the differences between people so that, for example, it's quite tacky in the Netherlands to be very loudly rich. And it's very common to put housing for the poor right next to the wealthiest part of town with the idea that everyone should be mixing on the same level playing field and should have access to the same kinds of amenities. Like, I love the results, but then when it came time to put my weird kids through that process, it seemed like so mean, and they had such a horrible time, in part because of the mistakes I had made, that it became very difficult for me to feel like, oh, this education system makes sense to me at all. It's great for like 97% of people. But if you're in the 3%, look out.
Yeah. What questions do you all have? You have a good question there, Nicole?
Well, when you're talking about the Dutch, when we read that section, our family, our dad's side of the family, is all Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter lives in Kalamazoo, and, big Dutch population up there. And we always, the thing about not wanting to make waves, not wanting to argue, we were always taught growing up being a bald-headed Dutchman, and standing up, and we're going, that doesn't sound right. And Jillian goes, oh no, that's just the way it is, up there in Michigan. They don't want to make waves. And
It's Dutch people are famous for saying exactly what they think at any given moment.
yeah.
Like, for example, you look like a foolish American on your bike with a helmet. They'll just tell you that straight to your face.
Very blunt, yes.
But they don't, my impression is they don't view that as argumentative. They view that as just simply saying the truth. And in a school scenario, they view the job of the teacher as to tell the truth to the students, and the job of the students to follow that path straight where they want to get them to go.
You absorbed a lot from the various cultures you were in with the populations and stuff. Did you ever have any inkling that the people surrounding you were absorbing some of your family's habits?
Oh boy, those poor other people. I think we were often objects of curiosity in many of these communities. And we found that it sort of depended where we were. In New Zealand, there was a brief vogue in Harper's school for American accents when Harper was there, which Harper responded to by adopting a bad fake New Zealand accent, which he then maintained for several months after we left. And we did see that in Island Bay, the part of Wellington that we lived in, we did see that we sort of became a kind of like bonding agent in the community. A bunch of fun community activities formed around our visit. Like, what a fun time for us to like have a big block party. Since the Smith Coises are here, let's show them how Kiwis drink. And so a bunch of craft brewers brought all their beer to our block and had a big party. But it really seemed more like what they wanted to do was show us. They bought into the idea that I wanted to learn from them, and they viewed themselves as the best possible teachers. Whereas in the Netherlands, of course, there was never a sense from any of the Dutch people I talked to that they believed they could ever have anything to learn from any of us. They are like the most contented people in the world, according to various United Nations surveys. What could they learn from us? A bunch of Americans who had said out loud that we thought we were bad at being a family, so bad that we had to go around the world to figure out how other people did it. So I don't know how much people drew from us necessarily. My hope is that they at least remember those 3 months we were hanging around fondly as a time where a bunch of fun stuff happened because the Smith Coises were in town.
When you were in Costa Rica, I mean, how did they view you in Costa Rica, do you think?
There's a real divide in Costa Rica, and particularly in the town we are in, between expats and locals, and that's not surprising. There's a language divide and a cultural divide and an economic divide. Even, I can like claim poverty all I want when we were on this trip, but we have plenty of money compared to most of the people, the locals in Samara. And the population of Samara is evolving, especially as it becomes a very popular town for expats and retirees. Real estate prices are going up, locals are getting pushed out of the town. There are now a lot of people who used to live in Samara who now still work in Samara, but who live in the next town over and who have to drive or take a bus 25 minutes or 30 minutes into town. It's becoming a kind of interesting mix of Anglo expat town and with pockets still of houses where people haven't been priced out yet. And so the relationship was, I think, often uneasy, and we did everything we could to try and meet as many people as we could. We sent the kids to a local Spanish language immersion school, and they met classmates there, but a lot of those classmates were Americans who were down there visiting. Yeah. And so in Costa Rica, what we really found was that the vast majority of our time was spent with expats, and my time with locals was reporting time. It was when I was seeking people out to talk to them about their lives, to talk to them about their family structures, but that the life we were living wasn't a Costa Rican family's life, it was an expat visitor's life. And we couldn't find a way to break through that in what felt like a real way.
Yeah. So was there resentment from the native inhabitants towards expats?
My guess is yes. What I heard from them was the resentment is mostly in the form of real estate envy and annoyance. That the expat community and vacationers are the backbone of the economy there and the backbone of jobs, but they also have led to a lot of people being priced out of their homes. And so there's a lot of resentment around that, and also a reasonable amount of gratefulness that Samara, unlike a lot of other small towns in Costa Rica roughly that size, is economically flourishing. There are tons of jobs, there's tons of construction, there's tons of economic activity, but it has come at a cost. And so I think that for families, for example, who've been there for many generations, it felt very bittersweet to have their town flourishing even as they could no longer afford to live there.
What other questions do you have?
What do you guys think was the dumbest thing we did on the trip? Those of you who read the book. What was the thing you read where you were like, oh God?
I I had commented to you, you said that Hayes was so far from everywhere.
Yeah.
And my feeling is, but if you're in Arlington, you can drive for 90 minutes and not get anywhere.
Sometimes
And-
not even to work.
And in Hayes, if you leave, you can see so much in Kansas. In 90 minutes or 2 hours, you can get a lot of places. And, you know, if you're willing to go a little further, you can see the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, you know, or KU, you know, or K-State. And did you get into any of the rivalries of, or, you know, that brief time in Hayes, you know, like with K-State or
We were there during basketball season and college football season. And so, and Fort Hays, in fact, the year we were there, had an undefeated football team that went to, I think, the playoffs. And so we ended up getting, like, truly seeing the town build an enormous amount of enthusiasm around these athletes. Many of whom were Kansan, but some of whom were recruits from out of state. And so we ended up just sort of they were like the real celebrities in town, because we would see them at Dillon's or at like a Thanksgiving dinner that a local community center put on, and you know, people would give them standing ovations as they walked past. You know, these were like 22-year-old kids from Liberal who were like delighted to be the heroes of Hayes. I did not delve deeply into the K-State Kansas rivalry, in part because, in my view, Kansas's true rival is UNC, my alma mater, at least from a basketball standpoint. But I understand that it's fierce. Certainly, most of the teachers at my kid's school were all K-State alums, and so whenever anything exciting happened at K-State, they heard all about it at school. And the question of like whether it was far from everything or really it's actually close to things, but I just wasn't perceptive enough to see those things, I think is a great question. And the longer we were there, the more we came to understand that you could, for example, drive to a place like Lucas and see incredible stuff that you would never have expected to see. There's no outsider art city anywhere near Arlington, Virginia. That you could, go to Denver, that you could go to a lot of amazing places around us. Yet, when things happen to our family or our friends, when the people who were important to us who weren't in Hayes were at risk or at peril or needed us, that was when we felt that distance most acutely. When a friend of ours died on the East Coast while we were in Hayes, and Ollie went out to be with his widow, it was like an 11-hour trip, that cost an insane amount of money, and that was where the isolation, where we felt it, which is a little bit silly, in the sense that we were certainly not as far away from all those people as we were when we were in New Zealand, the furthest away place you can be and still be on Earth. But something about being here, being in America, but being so far from all those other people really hit us, and is one of the reasons I think that friends and family have become a real focus on us, Ollie and I, thinking about, well, what is our next step when the kids go to college, which is coming soon. We're trying to figure out where is the next part of our life. I think once upon a time we thought that would be New Zealand or Europe or something like that, but that's harder to imagine having had these experiences.
What are your daughters, where do they think they want to go to school? What do their studies?
Lyra is a senior this year and has applied to it. Do you guys know about how kids apply to like 20 colleges now? It's completely insane. She only applied to 12, and her friends are like, you only applied to 12 colleges? She has no idea. She has no idea where she wants to go or what she wants to do. In her ideal world, someone would come down from heaven and say to her, Lyra, you are going to this school. And she'd be like, great. In lieu of that, she applied to a bunch of colleges, and some will let her in, and we will buy a dartboard, and we'll put the college names on the dartboard, and she'll throw a dart at the dartboard, and she'll miss the dartboard completely, and the dart will hit the wall like over there. So we'll have to find some other way. She doesn't know. She has no clue. She finds it very hard to think about that part of her future, and likes the idea of college in the abstract, but in the concrete, she finds it quite frightening. We have done a lot of college tours. She hated William and Mary because our tour guide there was very into school spirit and William and Mary traditions, and Lyra thought that was uncool. And then we went to VCU, which is in Richmond, Virginia, where the tour guide literally didn't know anything about the school. And you could barely hear her, and Lyra was like, she was amazing. She didn't care about anything. I want to go here. So, time will tell where she ends up. Harper already has 1,000 ideas for exactly where she wants to go to school. She has a list made up of where she wants to apply. She is torn right now between going to a big state school like UNC, or going to school in Europe, or going back to Wellington and going to Victoria University there. She has very strong feelings.
What does she want to do? Does she know?
She hasn't been she still wants to be a waitress while she's in college. Or a bartender. She thinks that would be really fun. She has floated the idea of, she thinks physical therapy would be interesting. And I've been like, great. They open a new physical therapy place every hour in suburban Virginia, so you will not be lacking for a job. Lyra wants to be a writer, despite all the evidence I've given her that that's a bad idea. And we'll see. We'll see if she studies creative writing, if she follows that path, or if she finds something she likes better.
How many relationships have you maintained of the people in the various countries?
A lot, I'm really happy to say. Like, we are still in touch with pretty much all of our New Zealand friends. Many of the people we met in the Netherlands, some of the Americans we met there have returned to the United States. Some actually live out in Colorado Springs now. We've seen them there. Another family that we met in Amsterdam now lives in Pennsylvania. A couple of the Dutch families we're still in touch with. A lot of those Costa Rican expat families we're still friends with, and I'm seeing all my Hayes friends tomorrow. And that has been really nice, this feeling that we have these little pockets of friendships and relationships around the world, many of whom were travelers like us, and so they have dispersed to interesting places. So we now, when we want to go to Colorado, we have friends we can stay with. When we want to go to Seattle, we know people there. Harper and I are going back to Wellington this summer to go to the Women's World Cup, because that's being played this summer, winter in Australia and New Zealand, but summer for us. And we're staying with friends there and taking friends with us to the games, and that, I think, is going to be a really magical thing for us and for them, but also particularly for Harper, who has such beautiful and fond memories of that place, and who has continued texting and WhatsApping with her school friends from there ever since.
Was New Zealand your family's favorite?
It definitely was, yes. In part because it's a wonderful place, and in part because it was the first place we went, and it happened before the kids really got sick of everything. It really was like, we did the 3 months in New Zealand, and they were like, that was incredible. And then we said, okay, now we're going to the Netherlands, which they knew, but it really drove home for them. Oh, we really aren't just going home yet. We have to go to a whole other place and meet a bunch of whole new people and go to a whole new school and do it all again, and then 2 more times after that. And so New Zealand sort of occupies a very exalted place in their memories and imaginations, both for its beauty and for the friendliness of everyone, and also because it was before they were so angry at us.
If you were to do it over, would you be longer than 3 months?
Yes, absolutely. If we had the money for it, basically. The 3 months in each place was purely a decision based on, this is what we can afford to do, and probably not be deeply in debt when we get home.
Well, it makes sense. You
Yeah.
don't want four.
Right, but yes, the idea that, because what we found in each place was, just as we hit our stride, all of us, with friends and with school and with family and with each other and with starting to understand the place, then we would bail. And that's really frustrating. It was particularly frustrating for the kids, but it was frustrating for me too, as a writer and as a reporter and just as a human living in those places. And so a version of this trip in which we were able to do 6 months in each place, or we just chose 2 places and did a year in each place, seems like magical now. But at the same time, there was something fun about like the whirlwind and about knowing at the end of this year, this will be over. We only have to, no matter how bad it gets, we only have to get through this limited amount of time. And if something really, really sucks, there will soon be something new to replace it. And that was also sometimes valuable.
Are the girls looking backward now and maybe feeling a little different about it, or are they not grown up enough yet?
No.
Go back and think of it.
Lyra has grudgingly admitted that maybe it was
course, when she said that, like danced around the house, and she was like, shut up. She did, I'm happy to say, she did write her college essay about the trip. So I felt like mission accomplished. Yes, you know, Harper was very, even though Harper often had hard times on this trip, she was generally all in and had a much better time on this journey than Lyra did.
She's a more outgoing personality.
She's a much more outgoing personality. She's much more of a joiner. She loves meeting new people. Lyra does not like meeting new people. And so for Harper, it was a series of making a bunch of new friends, being so sad because she left the friends, making a bunch of new friends. So it was sort of a roller coaster, but most of it was fun. She, I think, continues to look at it as like a thing she loves to tell people about and brag about and reminisce about. Lyra, for her part, who we really were at loggerheads for a lot of this trip, who had real emotional difficulties with a lot of what was going on, has, I think, come to view this as a moment when she transformed a little bit and found ways to operate out of her own comfort zone and succeed in places that she didn't think she could succeed in, even in a horrible Dutch school where everyone was a jerk. And that, I think, has been valuable, and she's said as much. She's also said, don't ever do that to us again.
That was my question, would they do it again?
Harper, sure, absolutely. Harper was, like, at one point we were thinking, like, in what year is it now? In 2020, I got offered a job in New Zealand, and we were considering maybe moving back, and of course, Harper was like, yes, let's do it, let's move tomorrow. And Lyra was like, I'm not leaving this house ever again. And we pulled her it, and we eventually did not move to New Zealand. But yeah, I think that Lyra now is, every time we now take a shorter trip with Lyra, who is a true homebody, I remind her, we're only going away for 2 weeks. It's not like I'm forcing you to travel the world for a year. And she'll grudgingly be like, fine, I'll go on this wonderful vacation with you. Whereas Harper is always ready for more, is always ready for the next exciting thing, which is why she has always been the kid who looks at Lyra, who's 2 years older than her, and simply cannot believe that Lyra is not embracing all the perks of being old. She can't believe, for example, that Lyra still doesn't have her driver's license, and shows zero interest in driving whatsoever. It has to be basically forced behind the wheel by us to get any of her hours in. Harper had an alarm on her phone for 6 months set for the date and time of her learner's permit test. And she would occasionally just show us her phone and be like, 4 months, 3 days, 2 hours, 11 minutes until my learner's permit test. And she's ready. She's ready for college. She's ready to grow up and be in the world. And Lyra isn't exactly. But I think feels as though when it happens, she can probably survive it in part because of this trip.
Did she make any lasting friends, or did she?
Lyra?
Yes, after in reading the book,
Nope.
it didn't seem like she really.
She is in touch now and then with a few of the girls that she hung out with in Hayes. But she's not a big social media person, and she's not good at keeping in touch with friends. So no, to her, the friends she mostly remembers are the family, adult, and kid groups that we have reconnected with and reunited with since then. So like Tracy and Gary in New Zealand, who we were so close with there, who we met in Paris for Gary's 50th birthday. She remembers them fondly, and they communicate, like she communicates with those adults, but they're not like kid friends that she made, and that makes me really sad, while also understanding that she simply has a different kind of need for friendships and a different need for what she gets out of friendships than I do. And I don't understand it exactly, but it doesn't seem to me as though she's unhappy. It seems to me like she just wants something different than me. And one of the great lessons of the trip and of raising a kid who's really different from me is grudgingly coming to terms with that and not forcing her to try and be the kind of person that I am, which I'm not always great at, but I'm getting better.
It seemed like you took the right stage of their lives to do this trip. They were not little children, elementary school necessarily, and they weren't in that snarky teenager stage quite yet, so.
They just barely made it right during the trip. Yes.
If you had to give a new family that was gonna do something somewhat similar, what would be the top 2 things you would recommend, which that were good, that you did and you encouraged, and then 2 that you would say, you might do this different, with kids and then just as a couple?
I do think we hit the age window basically exactly right. Like I think basically 7 to 11 are about the perfect ages for something like this, in part because they're old enough that they're going to remember it, that they retain that experience in a way that is valuable to them personally and is also like gratifying to you, the parents. Like if we had done this whole trip and then 5 years later they were like, I don't remember a single thing about this, I would like kill myself. That would be horrible. But also, they're not old enough so that it is truly torturous to pull them away from their friend groups, and also, it doesn't feel like you're like hamstringing their academic possibilities. Like, if we had done it just a few years later, I think that both of them would have just had a really hard time going back to school and catching up and feeling like, you know, they knew what was going on in math. I think we would have sentenced them to several years of really struggling in a lot of classes. In ways that, you know, we do not push them particularly academically, but we don't want them to be like miserable in their classes. And I think they truly would have been miserable if they had gone this whole year. It's like learning a lot of fun stuff about the school of life, but not exactly getting great math classes. They didn't even speak the language in the Netherlands, so who knows what kind of math they learned there. So I think we hit that age window just right. And I would really urge people who are doing a trip like this, despite the problems that we had, to send their kids to the local schools in the place you can go, in the places that you go. It's a huge hassle. It's like a bureaucratic nightmare. It can cause various disasters that you are not anticipating, but it is also the thing that helped all of us make the most friends and meet the most people and truly made them feel like they were living different lives. That were in many cases and in many ways very, very rewarding. And that is a thing that I think a lot of families who go abroad don't do. They homeschool or they unschool or they send their kids to the fancy American school in Amsterdam or something. But if you can find a way to just send your kids to the local school, like that is where they will learn the most stuff about what it means to be a person in that place. And then what mistakes? I would not engineer the trip so that you ran out of money at one point and had to write a whole chapter of the book in like 3 days, so someone would send you a check so you could afford to buy the next set of plane tickets. I would also recommend talking more to your kids about what the trip should be and what their hopes for it are and where they might like to go and what they might like to do while they're there, and give them a sense of ownership over what this experience can be, so it's not a thing you are subjecting them to, even if it's a wonderful thing you're subjecting them to, but it's instead a thing that they have created with you. And I would maybe like do like 1 more month in New Zealand.
So is this polder concept similar to the family meetings that we were having 20 years ago, or, you know, that, and I can't remember where exactly that originated, but...
I guess it depends how democratic were your family meetings. I mean, so the polder model comes out of, it's the polders in the Netherlands, that's the name in Dutch for the reclaimed land that's been reclaimed from, you know, the swamps and canals, or I mean, rivers and waterways and lakes that made up most of the Netherlands before they set up their very intricate canal and water pumping system that has generated enormous amounts of arable and livable land. But because the whole country is underwater, it's very easy for that system to, you know, spring a leak, basically go awry and flood the entire country. And so the poldering system requires an enormous amount of compromise and agreement between everyone at all levels of society to make sure that it continues working. It requires everyone to agree that this is important, everyone to agree that they will do their job, and that everyone else will do their job, and everyone to agree that they will collaborate when they need to solve a problem before things get too bad. And so the polder model comes out of those polder systems, which were small community-oriented boards in charge of making all those decisions about water. And it has just basically spread to all other types of society. And so we had had family meetings in our family where we would like call the kids together and make fun announcements or ask them what they did in school today. But what we had not had was had family meetings where we took their concerns and contributions truly seriously, or at least considered them as important as we considered our own. And if they were different from ours, try to find some middle ground of compromise that made sense for everyone, as opposed to trying to find a way to convince them that we were right. And that was difficult, but it also seems crucial the older your kids get. And that is more the model that I think that we are following now. And so it's sort of a family meeting, but it's a family meeting in which I'm not the CEO. It's a family meeting in which the four of us are a team, all of whom have a stake in what this family is doing.
Does it follow a certain format?
There aren't Robert's Rules of Order. No, I mean, people I know who work for Dutch companies, who have had experience working for American companies, often will complain, but like a Dutch meeting, to like the magazine I work at, the editor-in-chief, once someone tried to schedule a 90-minute meeting, and he said, no one should ever have a 90-minute meeting for anything other than planning the invasion of Poland. And that was his philosophy. But Dutch company meetings, everyone in the company is at the meeting, and they're like 5 hours long. And it is truly just everyone talks and has their say, and you very slowly come together in a point with everyone trying to facilitate that. It seems like an insane way to run a company, and yet extremely successful companies use it and employ that model, and it works. In a family scenario, it mostly meant everyone talks. We try and voice out loud where we think the differences are, and then we try and figure out what the middle is. Sometimes there is no middle. So sometimes the answer is, this time we'll do what you guys want to do. Remember this. Next time we have these conversations, and give us what we want. Sometimes they do.
Any other questions about the book?
So what if your oldest daughter would not want it, if you would have asked her and she would not have wanted to go? How?
That's the problem, right? It's like, we're not gonna not do this amazing thing just because one kid is like, I like being in my room better. But if what you're looking for in a situation like that is, all right, if we do this thing, what is the version of it that feels most welcoming to you? And what are the things you can plan or contribute to that make you feel like it's your trip too? But yet, I still can't comprehend a way that would work. Where it wouldn't at some point be me being like, look, we're going on the trip.
Yeah.
Like, give it up. That ship has sailed. But yet, that's happening basically with the college decision. Now that's her decision, not ours. We have our opinions, but she is the one who's going to have to make that decision. And even if it's a decision that we think is kind of not great, unless it's a decision we truly can't afford, we want to encourage her to take that leap. But yes, I still find it very difficult. I think that kids understand that at certain points, even Dutch kids, I think, understand that in certain cases, parents pull rank. And, if someone gets a job somewhere and you have to move from Delft to Rotterdam, the kids do not get a say in whether you move from Delft to Rotterdam. It's just a thing that has to happen. But you then try to make them part of the decision-making and planning in such a way so that when you get to Rotterdam, they feel like it's their home too. And it's been their planning process and decision-making process as well.
What things did you do then that she felt a part of?
On the trip?
Yes, yeah. Because, she didn't. She is a loner.
Yeah. The funny thing about Lyra, I don't know if any of you have had children or grandchildren like this, is that she does not want to be moved out of her comfort zone, But 9 out of 10 times when you actually get her off her butt to do something, she ends up being like, that was fun. And like she's surprised every time. Every time she's like, who knew that doing a thing could be like a blast? And we're like, oh my God. And so she ended, I mean, pretty much everything that we did as a family, all of those trips to New Zealand, all of those cycling trips to Rotterdam and Den Haag and through Amsterdam and stuff in the Netherlands and all those horseback rides. Well, she hated the horseback rides, but everything else in Costa Rica, she did all that stuff. And what ended up being the compromise was that what we wanted out of the day was to do 5 fun things. And what she wanted out of the day was to do 0 fun things. And so we ended up settling on 1 to 2 fun things, which she would be like, that was great, but now I absolutely must go back to the house and not speak to anyone or do anything for the next 3 to 4 hours. And then we would sort of, we'd say, okay, well, it's the thing you need. And then we would have quiet time, or like we would go out and do something without her. But she found ways to be involved, and it seemed important to her really to be with us and to be involved in things that we're doing. And it's, you know, especially in these unfamiliar places, she didn't want to necessarily be like left alone in our house in Costa Rica or whatever. She wanted to be with us. She just wished it didn't involve so much stuff that we wanted to do all the time. If we could just go out but not do anything, wouldn't that be wonderful? But I think that she liked a lot of it. I guess that's between her and her therapist someday.
Do they express that they're glad you did it, your wife?
They do,
Kids?
yes. Well, my wife was always, there was no convincing involved with her. She had just gotten, she's an attorney, she had just gotten out of the absolute worst case of her entire career that had driven her insane, and she worked like a dog for years and then had lost. And so she was like, I'm game for anything, just get me out of here. So, and yes, and so for us, this is forever the sort of the defining point of our parenthood. This is sort of where we feel like we were as close to our children as we will ever be, as close to each other as we have always wanted to be, and even despite all the stuff that was terrible about it, it is something that I think we are going to be endlessly grateful for both of us. And our kids, yes, basically. Thank you, everyone, for coming down.
I had to chuckle at, was it the Today Show or the Good Morning America, which one?
Good Morning America.
Good Morning America, where Lyra said, when they told us it was a cocktail mix of rage and excitement or something like that. And it just
That was her vibe. She did give me, in addition to writing her own section about the stuff I got wrong, she also read the whole book. She was the first person to read this book when it was in manuscript, before my editor or my agent or my wife or anyone did. But she gave me a lot of notes. And I was like, am I taking notes from a 13-year-old? But some of the notes were really good. She did in fact notice that on 3 different occasions in the book I described her as simmering with rage. And she was like, you should only do that once. And I was like, that's a great note.
What are you working on now?
This book came out in January, Vintage Contemporaries. I finished a second novel that right now I'm trying to convince my editor to buy, so wish me luck. It's totally different. It is set in Milwaukee, the town I grew up in, and it is a action-adventure starring a bunch of dumb 12-year-old boys and werewolves and stuff.
Was it difficult to transition from nonfiction to fiction?
It was really fun. It's like, I mean, I'm still a journalist. I work at Slate. I'm writing nonfiction pretty much all the time. But it's really fun to like activate a different part of my brain and not feel like I have to be beholden to the facts to be able to just make stuff up, which is nice because often when you're writing nonfiction, you're like, wouldn't it be cooler if this happened? But you can't do that. You just have to write the thing that actually happened.
I was
Fiction is good.
fortunate enough to get you to come here, this side trip.
She invited me. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be cool.
She read the book and thought it had some fun stuff to talk about, and she was like, come on, slide. And I really liked our time in Kansas, and really like the idea of coming back to Kansas and talking to y'all and getting a chance to see friends in Hayes and experiencing the glory of the plains.
And we're thankful to have you here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad you all came.